Hello and welcome! Today's film is going to be a little bit differently from the direction that we've been going in so far. I wanted to take a break and cover Song of the South, which I know is not available to watch anywhere unless you bootleg it.
Yes, sir, honey. It happened on one of them zippity-doo-dah days. Now, that's the kind of day when you can't open your mouth without a song jump right out of it. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay.
Because it isn't easy to find, I wanted to instead focus on why it's not easy to find and if it should stay that way. Starting from the beginning, Song of the South was released in 1946 and it was based off of the Uncle Remus stories that were written back in the 19th century. The books were written by Joel Chandler Harris, who lived on a farm with the slaves, and he befriended a lot of them. He was able to go and talk to them for hours and hours and hours and was told all of their oral stories that they came up with. And what was really nice is he took it and written it in a book because they weren't able to, and tried to make it as authentic as possible from what he heard them tell and make sure that it was basically direct word of mouth into this text. There's so much historical controversy around every single subject, including slavery, including this film, including racism, segregation, the list goes on. It's this whole big bowl of soup, of stew, and all these elements into it that just make it build up and make it really meaty. First off, I want to say that I really do appreciate this Harris tried to create the stories as authentically as possible. I think it was very endearing, even if the aftermath didn't turn out that way. It is well known that the slaves were not educated people, and if they were educated, there would not be slavery, and that was what they knew. So they didn't want that happening, and they made sure that they tried to keep the slaves as stupid as possible. So of course the dialect is not going to be as proper as you and I would be speaking. However, they were still very extremely smart people, and it's fantastic that they were able to create stories for themselves. It is still a shame of what happened, that we had to have slaves in the first place, but for them to stay hopeful and for their history, I'm really grateful that this book was around and they were able to put it into text so that those stories were not lost forever, and historically we can learn from the past, and we can also learn and take what they went through and put it into a positive way. It was a horrible experience, but they were able to survive it, and we are better than that, and we have learned better than that. And that's something you have to remember even going into this film. In the 40s, slavery was gone, but segregation wasn't. And segregation was basically slavery of the 20th century, as horrible as that sounds. And unfortunately, within the time period, not only did Disney do cartoons that were controversial, which I do want to take a look at a later time because there were so many controversial contexts, not only towards slavery and racism, things like that, but also what was happening in World War II and all the Nazi propaganda cartoons, and I think that's very interesting to look back historically on. For now, as an overview, it's important to understand what was happening at the time when you're looking at this film. Mistakes were made, people weren't smart, and incidents happened where entertainment wasn't made in the best light. However, with the controversy of today and the fact that this film has not been released in home video ever, and it was only released in theaters up until the 80s, was the last time, I think 86 is the last time it was shown in theaters. It just adds more fuel to the fire, and there's so much hype that when you watch it, you look and you're like, how is this as bad? Especially when other cartoons at the time were so much worse off, and they're visibly present today. You're able to watch them as a historical standpoint. And jumping into it, I think Song of the South should definitely be released for historical reasons, as well as there are some nice highlights of it. Song of the South takes place after the Civil War, so slavery is no more, it's gone. They're not slaves. I know people have said that they're slaves, but they are not. And unfortunately at the time, even if they were slaves, they were not educated, they did not know what to do, they were brainwashed. So in a sense, it makes more sense for them to stay where they were familiar and know that they were going to be treated better. And people didn't realize that slavery was wrong. I know it's common sense now, but people didn't know. And it was just what they grew up with, and they thought it was okay because that's what they were taught. And until they were able to learn more, they just followed what they were taught. I mean, look in the sense of how long it's taken for gay rights to become a thing. People don't know, people aren't educated, they're not going to know what to do, and they're not going to make great decisions. You have to be able to have an open mind. And of course back then that was the normative. Same thing with segregation, that was normal. And I'm not saying it's right, it's definitely not right, but it was what was mainstream, and that's what you have to remember at the time. You have to put yourself back then and realize that, oh, this is what they were thinking, and it makes sense that they're thinking this because of XYZ. They are not slaves, they are just living on this plantation, and they are happy, which I know looks worse than it is. But it is an endearing story when you break things down and you understand what they were going for. It wasn't executed the best, however, they tried, and they tried to stay true to the story, which was authentic to what the slaves spoke. And that's something that you can't fault. Uncle Remus is really sweet. He's just a very sweet, happy-go-lucky guy, and is very endearing. I didn't think it was that bad a film. I think because of the controversy, there's such an overhype that you think it's gonna be a lot worse than it is, and it's not. At the same time, the songs are played everywhere, and I feel like Disney is doing this weird thing where they're trying to keep this film hidden from it because it wasn't the best material, but it isn't as bad as other people think either. Especially when Birth of the Nation's still out there, Gone with the Wind is still out there, and other films from that era are still out there, and they're talked about historically, and we learn from it. But the thing that's weird to me with Disney and how they're portraying this film is the fact that they're keeping this hidden. However, Zippity Doo Dah is still one of the most well-known film songs ever, and it's played everywhere you go, and everyone knows it, and it's in every single long song.
Not so fast! Yikes! Hang on to your hat! Please! Slow down! Slow down! Relax!
We're not even on the ride yet.
Straight to video compilation that they came out with, as well as just It's Known As You're Young, and it's so mainstream, but nothing else is.
Zip, 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 zip. Zip, 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 zip. Zip, 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 zippity doo dah. Zip, 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 zippity doo dah day.
Plus, you have this gigantic ride in Magic Kingdom that is all about this film.
We're here. We're ready to ride Splash Mountain.
But no.
Bingo. I was told that we could be the first to ride Splash Mountain, and we're ready to go.
Well, it's not open yet.
And it's always been weird to me, and that's why I wanted to make sure I watch it even more, because it makes you want to watch it to understand why this ride is here. And they do a good job with the ride. It's pretty close to the film adaptation, at least the cartoon segments of it. So that makes me want to know why they can't just release this film. And it just is very contradictory to me, in my opinion. I mean, I think everyone agrees that they need to release this film. And they need to make sure they release it correctly, so they do it in a historical standpoint, and they express their opinions before the film starts and put segments in there about the history and make sure that everyone understands what happened at the time, where did they go wrong, if they went wrong, and do it the way that Warner Brothers was able to do it with their cartoons. Because if you're just hiding it away from history, that's worse. You should be able to own up to it, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it wasn't executed perfectly. It's something that was a very important film at the time, and it needs to be seen. I think it's best to leave you with a quote from The Lion King and Rafiki.
The past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it.
And as always, I hope you have a magical day, and I will see you real soon.